Emotional burnout. This is what most people picture when they hear the word burnout, but even this version is frequently misunderstood. It is not simply being tired after a hard week. It is a state where the emotional resources that allow you to feel, respond, and engage with the people and situations around you have been depleted so thoroughly that ordinary interactions start to feel like enormous effort. You care about the people in your life, but something about accessing that care feels far away. A friend calls, and instead of wanting to talk, you feel a quiet dread at picking up. You sit through a conversation and realize halfway through that you have not actually been present in it. The feelings are not gone, they are simply unreachable, sitting behind a kind of glass that you can see through but not quite touch. And the effort of trying to reach through it is often more exhausting than simply waiting for it to lift on its own. Decision burnout. This version has nothing to do with emotions or relationships. It builds quietly from the sheer volume of choices a person makes every single day: what to eat, what to wear, how to reply, which task to start first, which version of a message sounds right, whether to say yes or no to something small. None of these decisions are significant on their own, but the mental effort required to make each one draws from the same resource. And by a certain point in the day, that resource is simply gone. What follows is not laziness. It is the brain's way of conserving what little capacity remains. Small choices start to feel genuinely difficult, and the easiest response to any new decision becomes doing nothing at all, which is often mistaken for procrastination, when it is actually the brain running a sensible calculation about limited remaining capacity. Compassion fatigue. This is the burnout that comes specifically from being the person others lean on. It affects caregivers, therapists, nurses, and teachers in well-documented ways, but it also quietly affects anyone who is consistently the most emotionally available person in their circle. You absorb other people's pain, carry their problems alongside your own, and over time, the weight of that accumulates. At a certain point, hearing about someone else's difficulty stops generating empathy and starts generating a subtle, uncomfortable numbness. The care is still there in theory. The capacity to actively feel it in the moment has worn thin, and that gap between wanting to be present for someone and finding yourself unable to fully get there can carry its own quiet guilt that compounds the exhaustion rather than relieving it. Social burnout. This is the exhaustion that comes not from work or responsibility, but from the sustained effort of being around people. It shows up most often in people who spend large portions of their day in social settings, offices, classrooms, service environments, and find that by the time they reach home, they have nothing left to give. Even a phone notification from someone they genuinely care about can feel like too much to deal with in that moment. This is not introversion, though introverts tend to experience it more acutely. It is a specific depletion of social energy, the resource the brain uses to track conversations, read tone, choose words carefully, and manage the ongoing performance of being socially appropriate. When that resource runs out, the only recovery is genuine solitude and quiet. Existential burnout. This version is harder to name while it is happening because it does not come from overwork or social exhaustion. It comes from a prolonged loss of meaning. You are doing the things you are supposed to do, showing up, completing tasks, maintaining relationships, but the sense of purpose that used to sit underneath all of it has quietly faded. Nothing feels particularly worth doing, not because you are depressed in a clinical sense, but because the reason behind the doing has become unclear. People who experience this often describe it as going through the motions, a phrase that captures it well. The motions continue. The feeling that the motions mean something does not. And the hardest part is that from the outside, nothing appears to be wrong at all. Physical burnout. This is the version the body carries when the mind has been pushed past its limits for too long. Sleep stops being restorative. You wake up already tired. Small physical tasks feel heavier than they should. Your immune system starts underperforming, and you find yourself getting ill more often than usual. Headaches, muscle tension, and a persistent low-grade fatigue become background features of the day. This is not a lifestyle problem or a sign of weakness. It is the body communicating in the only language available to it that something has been running beyond its sustainable capacity for longer than it can quietly absorb. Creative burnout. This is the specific depletion felt by anyone whose work or life requires them to regularly produce original ideas, make aesthetic decisions, or solve problems that have no single correct answer. Writers, designers, musicians, and anyone in a role that demands constant invention can reach a point where the well feels completely dry. Sitting down to create produces nothing, or produces work that feels hollow and mechanical compared to what it used to feel like. The frustrating part is that forcing effort through creative burnout rarely works. The ideas don't come harder, they simply don't come. Rest is the only real solution, which is difficult to justify in environments where productivity is visible and celebrated, while the need for genuine rest is treated as a personal failing rather than a biological requirement. Moral burnout. This one is less commonly discussed, but deeply felt by people who work or live in environments where they are regularly asked to act against their own values, or where they witness ongoing injustice without the power to change it. Over time, the weight of that gap between what they believe is right and what they are required to do or witness creates a particular kind of exhaustion. It is not tiredness from effort. It is tiredness from compromise, from the ongoing internal cost of existing in a space that consistently conflicts with who you are and what you believe matters. And unlike other forms of burnout, this one rarely improves without a change in the environment itself. Relational burnout. This is the depletion that comes from investing heavily in relationships that consistently take more than they give. It does not require anyone to be deliberately unkind. It simply requires a long enough imbalance. One person consistently available, consistently giving, consistently managing the emotional labor of keeping the connection alive before the energy required to maintain it exceeds what can be sustainably offered. When relational burnout arrives, even relationships that matter start to feel like obligations rather than sources of comfort. The desire to connect is still there. The capacity to initiate or sustain it has quietly run out. And what makes this version particularly difficult to address is that the people involved often have no idea the imbalance exists because the person experiencing it has been too consistent and too giving for anyone to notice. Something has been running at a cost. Recovery burnout. This is perhaps the most ironic version. The exhaustion that comes from trying too hard to recover from burnout itself. Therapy appointments, wellness routines, sleep schedules, journaling, exercise plans, dietary changes, all of these are genuinely useful tools. But when recovery itself becomes another performance, another set of tasks to complete correctly, another area where you can succeed or fail, it stops being recovery and becomes its own source of pressure. The person trying to heal ends up adding one more thing to manage in a life that already had too many things to manage. And the burnout deepens quietly underneath the appearance of getting better, often without the person realizing that the recovery itself has become the problem, and that the most useful thing they could do is simply stop trying to optimize the process of feeling well again.